evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Clerical Conversations on the Crisis on the Restoration Radio Network. I'm your host, Nicholas Wansbutter. For tonight and carrying forward, I'm actually going to be taking over hosting duties from Justin Soder, and I have the privilege of being joined by our usual guest for this show, His Lordship Bishop Daniel Dolan, pastor of St. Gertrude the Great Church in Westchester, Ohio, and Father Anthony Cekada, assistant pastor at the same church. So, my Lord and Father, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And my Lord, I know you always like to start a show with a prayer, so I'd invite you to lead us in that, and then we can carry on.
Our show this evening is a continuation of last month, that is to say a further consideration of sports, particularly the Olympic sports and the concept again of sports as a religion, maybe a little bit more developed. This show is being recorded on the first Saturday of March, which is the feast day as well of the patron saint of Wales, St. David. I want to say a prayer in his honor. Seems especially fitting for two reasons. St. David has the nickname of the Water Man because he and his monks never drank beer, which was the common drink of people in Wales of his era. And of course, as we well know, beer is a necessary adjunct to many, if not all, sporting events before, during, and after. The second reason is that one of his pagan neighbors, in order to disturb the monks of St. David, who were very strict and very recollected, at some point actually arranged for his slaves, his female slaves, to cavort about to play games within the sight of the monks. And they, of course, resisted the temptation. But it's interesting to note that there's always that idea, that connotation, as maybe we'll develop today, of the playing of games and offense against modesty. In any case, let's say a prayer in honor of St. David. O God, the light of the faithful and shepherd of souls, who did set blessed David to be a bishop in thy church, that he might feed thy sheep by his word and guide them by his example. Grant us, we beseech thee, to keep the faith which he taught and to follow in his footsteps, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. St. David, patron of Wales, pray for us.
All right. Thank you for that, my Lord. As you mentioned, we're revisiting sports today, and continues to be a timely topic. The Winter Olympics just wrapped up about a week ago. And what I'd like to start off with is if we could perhaps expand a bit on some of the things that you were discussing about the dangers of sport. I know we got a number of questions from listeners. Some people perhaps concerned that the clergy is saying that sports is just bad in general, or it's a sin per se to take part in sports. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, thank you, Nicholas. I welcome the opportunity to make an important distinction, which I think emerged a little bit in our first show. That is to say that sports can be viewed, and should be in a Christian context, as play, recreation, exercise, fun. And that's how the church has always viewed and indeed tolerated sports, as opposed to sports as what the Greeks and St. Paul knew as agonia, strife or conflict unto the death, and conflict or strife, as St. Paul says, for a perishable crown. That idea of sports as conflict and unto the death almost, or very close at cases, is very much current today. And then that's also connected with the idea of sports as a religion unto itself, and indeed a replacement for religion. So that's one distinction I would like to make. And then the other distinction would be more about the nature of sports again versus that of the Olympics. Father, what do you think about that distinction?
Well, it was the one that emerged last time. The idea that some of the things in the discussion that came out, the negative side of competitive sports, were tied in very closely with the idea that the struggle and agonia. which we talked about last time, and that is really where one sees the moral problem. That sports now have taken on a different cast, sort of a light of their own, where they're not done as much for recreation, but they become professionalized and have become a real source of strife. If you take something like a professional football, which we talked about last time, that this has an enormous amount of strife written into it. It's now the nature of the game. If you look at pro football, if you look at college football, it went perhaps from something in the Ivy League of being recreational to something where it actually is, it produces strife and it produces injury. The same thing certainly at the high school level. If you read about the sports teams in high school, how the students are motivated, what they're expected to do, again, you have that strife and that injury, and that even goes lower down into grade school. So if you take one example like that, football in the United States, you see that element of strife where the fun aspect of sport, if played in moderation, is something that's lost, and it's turned into something that is, in fact, strife, struggle, and indeed, in the case of football, danger. If you multiply that, if you look at, for instance, basketball, and you look at what that has morphed into at the professional level and at the college level in the United States, and to a certain extent at the high school level, and with so many of these sports, especially the competitive team sports, across the board. So that's that would be like a classic example would be the competitive team sports, which I would distinguish from sports which or forms of recreation that are of their essence don't have that competitive team type of struggle. Like tennis or badminton for some reason.
Good. If I could just jump in here, Father, as you're speaking, I'm remembering that you made a very interesting, insightful comment. I thought, not that you have any uninsightful comments, but last time in the show was about how you noticed, or one could notice at these athletic events, that nobody's smiling. Nobody's having a good time. It's all gritted teeth and serious looks. Unto anger and pride, and calling the referee different names. It's sort of as though every sporting event were the defense of England against the German invasion, and and somebody's got to say blood, toil, tears, and sweat. But that's not the point. That is the point of agonia, very much so. That's the old pagan idea. I think here. And this was something I tried to get across in the show last time. We Catholics have to know our church history and our history in general. Most Catholics had no idea that for most of the history of Christianity, there was no such thing as sports. Sports were revived at the communist revolutions of the 19th century, started in England, and organized sports as we know it, and then spread throughout the whole world. But until then, since the Emperor Theodosius in the 4th century, about 380, abolished them, there were no formal sports. So when people, Catholics, Christians got together for an occasion, there would be maybe some form of informal play, but anything that got too organized or too public or too formal was condemned. Very often, so like in the case of the Irish, who would have their patterns or their feast day celebrations, there would be drunkenness involved, and that would be one reason. But it was this idea of getting angry and going overboard and fighting simply to win. Maybe drunkenness, maybe gambling would be an element of it. So to understand the teachings of the saints and the fathers about sports, that's it's almost indispensable, I would say, for a Catholic today. And then the other idea, as we're stressing today, is it should be only a game. I should see smiles. This should be fun. You can put your heart and soul into it, but it's a game. And if you get angry, if you get all stressed out, if you are a poor winner or a poor loser, then it's not achieving its purpose, not at all, which is that of relaxation and healthy exercise. Lastly, maybe we should talk a little bit about, I think some of our listeners right away interpreted what was said last time as saying that, oh, you're saying that playing sports is a sin. Aha, got you there. Because isn't that a tendency of the modern day traditional or traditionalist Catholic? Everything is reduced to the aspect of sin. If it's a sin, then I might want to buy into that because I speak that language. But if it's not a sin, then it must be okay. And what we're saying is, no, we're not creating new sins. There's plenty of sins on the books as it is. No one is interested in creating any new sins. However, if it leads to a sin, as is so often the case with sports on any level, it can lead to sin because it's competition, it's strife. There's a question of pride and wanting to be superior to others that easily enters in. It's the devil. A playground can be easily the devil's playground. But just because something is not a sin does not mean that it's necessarily maybe the very best or the best for us. Or at the very least, what I was saying is that know your history, know some of these ideas, and then try to modify, maybe that's the term we want, modify your view of sports so as to keep it within the parameters, within the limits of a good Catholic viewpoint on these things.
So, Millard, if I could try to encapsulate in a sentence what you're saying, it's not the physical activity or the sports themselves that's the problem. It's the approach that one takes to them and how serious one takes them. And if you take it too serious, that's when it starts becoming dangerous. Would that be fair?
Yes, if there's any excess. But physical activity, Nicholas, I think we do need to make the distinction that if you take the physical activity to an excess so that there is danger to one's health, say football and soccer players with head concussions. There's a lot of that because of this idea of excess and victory at any cost. So you have to, if you cast sports as pure, gentle, albeit enthusiastic play, that's okay, I think. But if you get into any of these other excesses, then that can be indeed sinful. And therefore, you know what? I'm thinking of sports as a little bit like dating for a young person. If God has called you to the married state, you have to date. But guess what? Dating is an occasion of sin, particularly today because we live in a sex-drenched society. And dancing can be an occasion of sin, but it's a necessary occasion of sin. Perhaps for our world today, you could make a little bit of an analogy with sports. It's an occasion of sin. And anybody, adults or children, can fall into that very easily. So we need to maybe we need some sort of a spiritual referee to blow the whistle and to say, hey, we're only doing this because it's fun. Let's have a good time. Let's enjoy ourselves. And let's get rid of all of these, let's dismiss these temptations. But life is full of the occasions of sin, but we still have to live.
Right.
Well, I'd like to expand on something Bishop Dolan said in terms of an example of balance when it comes to sport. Now, for more than 10 years, our boys here at St. Gertrude's have competed in fencing, which is a very interesting sport, which teaches you an awful lot of good qualities and poise and self-control and so on. And it's a very disciplined type of recreational activity. And it turned out to be one that was actually ideal for us because it's something that you could do if you have a small school. Our boys, in fact, won a number of years ago division championships against much larger schools. They became very good at it. And even our team now we have 3 boys, have been very successful in fencing, in the fencing competition, and even against large schools. We have a Division II fencing team, and a week ago or 2 weeks ago, they actually managed to beat the Division II team from the Jesuit high school, which is the largest Jesuit high school in the country. So it's very nice in the way of recreation. I go down to watch it occasionally, and I was down there 2 weeks ago, and it's all done in a very reserved sort of fashion, and it's, as a spectator, it's difficult to figure out how the points are being scored. But one of the things that I noticed, well, the kids seem to be having a great amount of fun. There is one man who is the coach for one of the fencing teams, and he, at 2 points, broke in to engage in a major argument with the referee and actually became angry that he thought the referee didn't score a point right for his team, and he kept on arguing with him. And all I could think of, this is right after our show, this is a perfect example of where you turn something that could be fun and enjoyable into an occasion for strife. And you're giving all the kids in the room a bad example by saying that this is something we should fight and get angry over. So he did this twice. It's lucky he didn't do it a third time, because I would have said something at that point. That
probably would have, yeah.
Because it ruined the spirit, it ruined the fun of it.
But for him, sports were agonia. It was strife, and it was victory at all costs. And he's a modern, and that coach pretty much symbolizes what modern sports, especially on the school level, high school, college, what's that become for us today?
I think that's. Sorry, go ahead, Father.
Well, and it completely gave the opposite message. The kids themselves were having fun; they were smiling, having a great time doing this. But someone like that, that's a question of a loss of balance.
Yeah. That speaking about fencing, then reminds me that fencing was, along with sort of general games, the recreation that was standard in the French collège, the standard French Jesuit boarding or high school, during the time of the education in the 19th century of the founder of the modern Olympics, the Baron Pierre de Coubertin. And that was that was something that he rejected as utterly insufficient. This very classical and traditional approach of fencing, as well as just games in general. He wanted something that had that element of absolute strife. And he believed it was only through agony, the agonia, that the gritted teeth and everything else, that characters would be formed. And I think probably you do indeed get characters, but you end up being just a character, and everybody else is sort of wondering what's the matter with you because of that kind of a spirit. But that's what he wanted to introduce, to reintroduce this old idea. He openly spoke about the Olympics as being a religion, and to get back to that old Greek pagan idea, and he worked with all of his might and main to be able to reintroduce that idea, and he rejected the old traditional recreation, if you will, or sport that was standard in his day.
Yeah, the thing that struck me, and this was again after our last discussion, I did a little more research on the Coubertin, the founder, or the refounder, as it were, of the Olympics, and found a very long article by a German Jesuit, Koch, K-O-C-H, who wrote about Coubertin's essentially his ideas on sports and the correlation between the Olympics and sport and then a religion. And I was quite surprised well, I suppose not quite surprised, but the word agonia came up in Coubertin's writings, precisely the sort of thing that the fathers of the church had condemned, this idea of the intense struggle. And it was quite something, actually, to see that there on the page, to see that this was a part of his idea and part of his ideals for the Olympics.
Well, I think we're segueing nicely into the Olympics themselves. Before we go any further, I would just like to try to situate us historically and contextually for listeners. As Bishop Dolan, you mentioned earlier in the show that Emperor Theodosius, and for listeners who aren't familiar with him, if I'm correct, he was the first Catholic Roman emperor because he was the successor to Constantine, who didn't actually, at least during the time that he was emperor, never converted to the Catholic faith. And one of the first things he did was shut down the Olympic Games, and he had his legions destroy the big Colosseum, or it wasn't the Colosseum, but the
stadium
building that had that razed to the ground by his legions. So it's in 1908 when people start getting the idea, and I guess spearheaded by this Coubertin character, of trying to bring revive the Olympics and bring these things back. But could we talk just a little bit about what were the ancient Olympics all about?
They were in a way, they were everything. They were what modern sports is for many, many people in the West. That is to say, it was a combination of sports. It was public entertainment. It was a religion, and it was politics, and it was a way of life. And it embedded and enshrined and insisted on all the pagan ideals. And so there's obviously no sense of modesty. There would be the nudity, and then there would be the blood, because it was indeed a strife unto the death. Sometimes the victors were privileged, if that's the correct term, to take the vanquished, the one whom a certain man had conquered in the stadium, to show him around as a slave in chains to everybody else. Or perhaps actually to kill him, or the other one would die in the conflict, and that was all hugely entertaining. And obviously, and before Theodosius had abolished them during the persecutions, sometimes it was Christians who were the fodder for these kinds of sadistic games. So that was the idea. It was a strife unto the death, as St. Paul says, for a perishable crown. And this is what that emperor finally abolished. Although, as I mentioned last time, there were a couple of more attempts to revive the Olympics before this. The fallen-away Catholic Freemason Coubertin finally did so successfully, and very publicly proclaiming that Olympics were indeed a religion, that the International Olympics Committee he saw as a college or a chapter of priests, and the revival of the Olympic movement was meant to inspire sort of a religious kind of feeling and a religious sentiment. And then he, to reinforce that, paid very great attention to all of the symbolism, to the music, to the architecture of the stadium, and to the ceremonial of the Olympics. He jumping a little ahead, but I'd like to say right now that he considered that the Berlin Olympics under Hitler, I believe it was 1933, were represented the very highest point. It was only the Nazis he felt that he could really trust to have the true and the pure Olympic spirit, and he was absolutely in admiration of Hitler. And it was Hitler's idea to have this ceremony, and it's nothing less this uniting ceremony for a whole nation of the travel around and the conveyance of the Olympic torch. That was a big deal. I know in Britain that was a big deal, and I presume they had something similar in Russia for Sochi recently. And it was Hitler's idea. It was his idea.
Well, that's fascinating, but it doesn't surprise me, because if one takes a step back and tries to look at it objectively, the Nazis, with their neo-paganism and kind of the things that they were occultism aspects to their thought process, fits in perfectly, and the adoration of the human body. They were big into the cult of the human body, and I mean they focused on the supremacy of one race, but in quotations, but that seems to be exactly all the same sorts of things, and the grand spectacles as well that are presented in the modern day Olympics. Now, one thing that I read in preparation for the show, I'm wondering if either you, my Lord, or Father Cekada are able to shed some light on this. At the time of the London Olympics in 2012, there was much talk about the history of the revival of the Olympics, because, of course, the 1908 Olympics were in London as well. And there was an article I found from Zenit. I know it made the rounds, and I remember people sent this to me after the Restoration Radio show on the Olympics, where I was very hard on the Olympics. People sent this to me saying, like, well, you're essentially saying, Wansbutter, you're out of line, because St. Pius X was all in favor of the Olympics. I mean, this is a claim that apparently is made by a book written by a lady named Antonella Stellitano, entitled Pius X, The Olympics and Sports. And apparently, I haven't read the book. I've just read the article from the Vatican News Service, I think it is, or it came from Zenit, claiming that he fully supported Coubertin and was fully supportive of the Olympics, and thought that this was a great thing.
Well, this Jesuit, Alice Koch, wrote this very lengthy article. It's at least a 50-page article, Pierre de Coubertin and his relation to the Catholic Church, and to a large extent really shoots that down. He said that Coubertin, of course, wanted the support of the Church for his particular undertaking, and he claimed that he had it. But according to Koch, that this was a myth that he promoted. That Mary Delval, because of his background, certainly in the English public schools, I think he went to rugby or something like that.
Eton.
Eton. So yes. Mary Delval was interested in this, very much in this idea of sport, but that Pius the 10th himself certainly did not give an endorsement to Coubertin and the Olympics, and certainly not to any of the ideas of the Olympics. So this was essentially just another scam. He was accorded, the Baron de Coubertin was accorded an audience with the Holy Father, and as you mentioned, Father, he was able to swing this through his connections with Mary Delval. Interesting that he went to school at Eton and was then influenced to a certain degree by this revival of in effect pagan athletics at the public school. I think the point of connection and the point of weakness was that Coubertin doubtless
was raised a Catholic, and he presented himself still as a Catholic, even though he was a fallen away Catholic, full of modernist and rationalist ideas, a naturalist, truly a naturalist. So, maybe the point of connection was this: that in the English public school system, athletics, agonia athletics, were held up, as we've said, as character building and as introducing, reinforcing the ideals of morality, especially concerning the Sixth and the Ninth Commandments. This would have appealed to both the Holy Father and to his Pro-Secretary of State, naturally, and of course he would have put a good glow on things as he went to see them. And so Mary Dolan, remember he had a boys' school himself in Rome, and was interested therefore in the work with youth, and sports would seem to play a role in that. The Holy Father, St. Pius X, when he was Patriarch of Venice, he would go swimming, and they say that he had some sort of gymnastic display that some group presented for him in the Vatican Gardens. So he saw its recreative value, you might say. I don't think it went any further than that, and I don't think that either of these very holy men really knew what Coubertin was up to. In any case, his plan to have the Olympics in Rome was a failure. It didn't happen. It went instead to London, I believe. That was the end of any so-called church involvement in that. There is that quote from, a rather beautiful quote from Pius XII, who had a lot to say about many, many modern things and movements in favor of sport, but obviously sport as we're talking about it today in a Christian context as recreation and as exercise, and not as a sort of a quasi-religion that would encourage the vices.
Sure. One of the other points to be made with regard to Pius X and Mary Doval is, in fact, Koch's article says that his friend of Coubertin's said that he was a clever tactician and had been blessed with the, quote, smartness of an advocate, unquote, and had skillfully, quote, camouflaged, unquote, his projects. So you get very much the impression of someone who knew what he was up to, and who wanted, as this article said, to pocket the blessing of the church for his project, so he could move it forward.
And it would seem to me that it would be easier for him to camouflage what he was up to when presenting things to the Pope at that time, which well predates the modern approach to sport.
Yes, and he. It is also said at this time that Coubertin had, quote, already given up the faith of his childhood and youth. So
he was quite the rationalist. Absolutely.
Yeah, he was. So he definitely was up to something.
Mm-hmm. He wanted to use the church if he possibly could. And how many were sort of lined up wanting to use the church for this or for that during the 20th century?
Well,
about Coubertin too, maybe. Could we say too about him just a little bit about his background? You said that he was raised a Catholic. Interesting family background is he had a grandfather who was a Freemason, and there is heavy speculation that he himself was initiated into the lodge at some point, maybe some of the lower degrees. That's not really. I don't see any firm proof for that, though. He had an uncle who was a priest, who was a follower of Lamennais, and who left when Lamennais left the priesthood and fell under censure. He too, his uncle had left and then died in the disgrace of the church. So there were sort of two movements: the Catholic movement, and his influence in his background. His mother was very, very pious, and the other movement was that of the sort of revolt against the Catholic Church, and then the third, the Freemasonry and the naturalism and all of the symbolism of that. So he goes to this French college under the Jesuits, and he's inspired by for the ideals of Greek pagan antiquity, the beauty of the whole Greek civilization, by his classics professor, a Jesuit, obviously a very gifted educator, and probably someone who had no idea that his disciple would take it to these lengths, and that has a great influence on him. And the next we hear him rejecting this balanced sports approach of his youth in the Jesuit high school, going over to England and getting to know some of the leaders of this English athletic revival, Protestant, of course, and already sort of, obviously because Protestant, Church of England, 19th century, already naturalist to a large degree, and being very, very impressed with this idea of strife and strife unto the very end as being character forming. And as a result of that, he himself formulates his ideas of this religion, a true one world religion for everybody, with a heavy dose of naturalistic or Freemasonic type symbolism and strife for the formation of characters.
Well, we're just past the halfway point, and for those of you who are just joining us, you're listening to Clerical Conversations on the Crisis on the Restoration Radio Network. I'm Nicholas Wansbutter, and I'm joined by His Lordship Bishop Daniel Dolan and Father Anthony Cekada. And today we're following up on last month's show that dealt with sports, and we've been talking about some more distinctions that can be made, perhaps to clarify some of what was said in the last show. And we're now discussing, in particular, the sporting phenomenon of the Olympics. We want to remind you that Clerical Conversations on the Crisis is a production of the Restoration Radio Network. All rights are reserved, and any duplication without explicit written permission is forbidden. Now, before that little break there, my lord, you were talking about the possible, at least familial Masonic connections for Baron Coubertin. I know a lot of people love their conspiracy theories.
Indeed.
To me, it's almost kind of neither here nor there whether Baron Coubertin himself was a Mason or not. I think the principles of the Olympics present themselves as being Masonic, regardless of what his particular connections were. And in preparation for the show, I did some looking around on the International Olympic Committee website, and they have a little, well, actually not so little, a 134-page booklet available online there for teaching children Olympic values.
Do you have that in front of you, Your Excellency?
It's in front of me. It's sort of a catechism almost.
Right. It is their catechism. And I'm just looking at page 12 of that document, where they lay out the fundamental principles of the Olympics. And just starting with the first one, I mean, there's just so much in the first principle. If I read that out, I think there's a lot to comment on there. Fundamental principle number one is that Olympism is a philosophy of life, exalting and combining in a balanced whole the qualities of body, will, and mind. Blending sport with culture and education, Olympism seeks to create a way of life based on the joy of effort, the educational value of good example, and respect for universal fundamental ethical principles.
It sounds like a catechism.
Yeah, it's certainly a complete philosophy to cover every aspect of someone's life. Not too much room left for religion, looks to me.
No,
and the book itself, the manual, is absolutely outrageous if you look at it from a religious point of view, because it has its creed, code, and cult. It has the three characteristics of the religion. They have their fundamental principles there. They have that are expressed, which we see there. They have a code of behavior or discipline, what you're supposed to do to be a good Olympian. And they have the cultus as well, with all of these ceremonies, and all of these things are explained in the Little Olympic Catechism. It's quite open, and to someone who has the Catholic faith should be quite shocking.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like they're clearly promoting one worldism and these. I just look at principle number 2. It says the goal of Olympism is to place sport at the service of the harmonious development of man, with a view to promoting a peaceful society concerned with the preservation of human dignity. So their harmonious development of man clearly has nothing to do with the kingship of Christ.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. That's the whole idea of Freemasonry. It's a quasi-religion or a true religion that replaces a revealed religion. And instead of God and our Lord, the God-man and our King, it puts man at the center as the God and as the King, and human and natural events and aspirations and goals. This is what's going to bring us peace.
Mm-hmm. And it seems that it's, I think of very French revolutionary, because I look at number 5 of their fundamental principles, and it puts me in mind of how the Russian Olympics, because of Russian laws regarding the propaganda about sodomy, how they've transformed this particular Olympics into propaganda to promote sodomy, even to the point that the German team changed their uniforms to a rainbow uniform in solidarity with sodomites.
I didn't know that.
And, principle number 5, it says any form of discrimination with regard to a country or a person on grounds of race, religion, politics, gender, or otherwise is incompatible with belonging to the Catholic movement. But the way the Russians are treated, clearly it's more liberty for all except for the enemies of liberty.
That's certainly true. And can I just insert here? It's not exactly sports-like, but I wish our listeners talk about thinking and reflecting a little bit, would reflect about all this propaganda that's going on right now against Russia, the Russian Empire, which at least seemingly stands for some moral standards and exalts religion in some sense, as opposed to the American Empire under Obama and all of the rest. And you know what they stand for, and you know what they're promoting. So while it's true that Putin was once a communist, and I don't know if he still is or not, or what's really behind all of that, but in any case, if you're going to compare the two based on some sense of morality or maybe the natural law or respect for religion, the Russian Empire doesn't really come across as all that bad, especially when you get into all of this transgender business and all the rest and the rainbow uniforms.
Mm-hmm. Although really, it's interesting because Russia isn't even that strong against these things. I mean, certainly more than here, but the law that everyone was up in arms about was just a law that said you cannot submit children to sodomite propaganda. That's all it said, and that was the outrage. And I don't know about in the United States, but up in Canada, it's been big news. Like all the legislatures were flying the rainbow flag instead of the Canadian flag during the course of the Olympics, again in solidarity, and in protest for this evil law that the Russians had.
Gee, it makes you think that it's all sort of manipulated on both sides, doesn't it, Nicholas? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Just kind of gives you that impression, maybe. And this is sort of supposed to, say, distract us a little bit and get us to back one side against the other team. Let's use team analogy here.
Right.
And meanwhile, the bad guys are accomplishing what bad guys are supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I somewhat wondered why they gave Russia the Olympics, but maybe it was on purpose so that they could turn the Olympics into an opportunity to promote these things.
This is how they promote their agenda, and it is very, very important. And we're talking about sports in general. That this concept for the public of panem et circenses, bread and circuses, entertainment, distraction. God forbid you should actually read, do some real research, or pray about any of these issues. Go along with everybody else, glance at the headlines, and follow the public opinion, which in ancient Greece, it was all about the Olympics. And in the modern world today, it's all about transgender and the rainbow and this and that liberation. And meanwhile, something else is going on, and it's a true movement of destruction.
The manual, the Olympic manual, has a section in it about celebrating our values through symbol and ceremony. And here's that's on page 25, Your Excellency. Here's where the cult idea, really comes along. It's where you really see this idea of turning it into religion and ceremony. That they use these ceremonies as a way to get their values across. And they start out by talking about this on, I think, page 26. The founder of the Olympics, Pierre de Coubertin, understood the importance of emotion and imagination. He integrated sports with a culture in the organization of the Olympic Games. He created symbols and encouraged ceremonies, music, and pageantry. These artistic and cultural experiences make the Olympics different from other sporting events and provide a basis for values education activities in a variety of curriculum areas. So not only do we see this in the Olympics, but this manual, that this catechism they put out, is intended to be used in schools, so children understand the symbolism of the Olympic religious ceremonies.
It's a perfect sort of a one world church, isn't it? They even have the required little bit of Latin thrown in, provided by this poor Dominican who ended up being a pal and ally of de Coubertin, the Father Dolan, Citius, Altius, Fortius. Faster, higher, and stronger. So what more can you ask for? You've got a little Latin, you've got some real popular ceremonial, you've got color and entertainment, and everybody is then really happy.
And it seems they even have sacred relics of a sort.
Really?
Lord, you mentioned the Olympic flame, and I'm just noticing on the page that Father was citing, it talks about the Olympic flame, and it confirms, as you said, at the 1936 Berlin Games is when the Olympic torch tradition was begun, and it mentions the whole ceremonies of how it's lit. It has to be lit by the sun at the ancient Olympia in Greece, and then it's passed from runner to runner,
sounds like
letting
the
it burn out until you get to the wherever, and then it has to burn throughout the entire games.
Funny, they don't mention the Fuhrer in there at all.
I was going to say you could picture the Fuhrer in his bunker, salivating over the details of this wondrous Greek ceremonial. Because he made a true effort to reestablish a pagan religion for the Aryan race, and this is part and parcel of that. Nobody talks about the Fuhrer anymore.
No, strange, isn't it?
Whatever you do, don't mention the war.
Yeah. And then they have an Olympic anthem as well, which I don't particularly recall how that goes. But it's got all the elements of this, and these things are trumpeted. Then I noticed the next page they're we talked about the cultus that they have. Then the code, they have the athlete's oath. I didn't know that you took an oath as an athlete.
Sort of like a sacramentum, right?
In the name of all competitors, I promise that we will take part in these Olympic Games, respecting and abiding by the rules which govern them in the true spirit of sportsmanship, committing ourselves to a sport without doping and without drugs, for the glory of sport and the honor of our teams. I mean, it's how much more religious can you get?
Right? Yeah.
Although it's interesting that part of that oath is against doping, because when I was in university, I got a chance to know a man who has actually competed in one of the Olympics, the Sydney Olympics, and he said everyone in the Olympics that's ranked above 50 is on drugs. It's just they don't get caught. And he didn't do drugs. He scored like the bottom. And he was a giant of a man. I mean, I don't even know what these other Olympians would look like in real life if he was small and weak compared to the the ones who are winning. But again, that suppose that goes to the whole agonia and taking this to such extremes that you're even going to manipulate and ultimately destroy your body by putting drugs into it. And I mean, they go to even greater lengths. I don't know if either of you heard about this, but there's a scandal at one of the previous Olympics that female athletes will apparently purposely get pregnant and then get an abortion because apparently this gives them some sort of hormone boost that can improve their performance.
Awful. Yeah. But none of the stuff would really surprise me because it is the agonia and the struggle. If you take another example from something non-Olympic, that the bicycle racer who was taking dope. But of course, you ask the question: if winning is the only thing, why shouldn't you be able to take dope? I mean, it doesn't. What renders not taking dope virtuous? Because perhaps you could do commercials and wear the insignia of the companies that make the dope, and make yourself more money. But it doesn't, because the whole thing is so detached from any moral values in the first place. Well, why not that?
Mm-hmm. So it seems to me this is implicit in all we've been discussing, but it seems to me that the Olympics are really something that Catholics ought to avoid any involvement in, be it watching or certainly, I don't think there's any way you could maintain a Catholic lifestyle putting in the type of hours and dedication required to get to the level needed to compete in these sports.
It's all for a false religion. Indeed, it is for a religion replacement, such as Masonry and the organized forces of naturalism specialize in, offering the chumps public a religion replacement. So you're right. How could it? As whether or not it's a sin, someone's going to want to know, is this a sin? But we won't get into that necessarily. But once again, it's certainly a very strong occasion of sin and can lead to that. And it's a pitiful weakening of our Catholic consciousness and sort of a disgraceful telling of our Catholic lives and our energy and all of the rest.
And founded by someone who rejected the teachings of the Church essentially and wanted to revive paganism. So it has nothing really to be said in favor of it.
He said that he would establish a religion, that the Olympics were meant to be a religion. That's exactly what they have become. But before we conclude, because I don't want to just limit this to something to the Olympics, which is maybe every couple of years. Let's at least say a word about organized sport, and certainly south of your border in the United States. Football, perhaps best of all for us, is a form of our Olympics, which goes on all of the time and rarely even takes a church-sanctioned holiday or rest period. And it's a religion. Football, organized sports in general in the West, and the football maybe in particular, it takes, the games are played on the Lord's Day very, very often. The themes that they present are deeply spiritual. Again, this idea of sacrifice and toil leading to a glorious conquest and victory. It has its High Holy Day, which of course is Super Bowl Sunday, and it has the elements of celebration as over Easter or Christmas. That is to say, a very large feast, a sort of a ritual feast that is consumed in front of the television set. The national anthem has to be played. There are jet flyovers. There's that ceremonial, the pagan entertainment at halftime. The saints that are held up in this religion are the successful players. And then there are the fallen, those who were not successful in the last game or in the last season. It even has its sacrifices. I think of those who are willing to sit outside in zero or sub-zero weather, perhaps on concrete seats, if you can imagine it, for hours to watch a game. They willingly would they make those immense sacrifices, and more than that, like the pagans of old, they offer up their children to the Moloch of organized sport. That is to say that they put their children into organized games like soccer or football, where there is a very, very strong risk of concussion, head concussion, and possibly permanent damage, or a few times each year. Certainly, it actually does lead to death. Those are some of the sacrifices that are willingly made for this religion replacement. And for the kids, it's all because they get to be demigods for a while. They enjoy their moment of popularity in high school or college before their lives sort of fall apart by their participation in these things. Sports pervade it's not just Olympics, it's sports themselves. It's an organized religion that pervades our lives. Once you remove yourself from this casual play, fun, recreation approach to anything that's too organized, that's too competitive, you get into excess, and you soon see I think the very sad results of the excess.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know in Canada, hockey would be the version of our national religion as opposed to football down in the United States. And I mean, to hockey, it's maybe even more obvious because you frequently see fist fights in hockey, and it's considered like the real tough players, the real good players are the ones that were going off the ice bloodied and then getting back on the ice shortly after that. And the National Hockey League playoffs, and I know there's a lot of mostly American teams, but in Canada is where the religions really takes hold. I mean, there's a whole code to you're kind of a weakling if you wear a visor on your helmet, and you're a real man if you take a puck off your face and have bones shattered in your face. And most of these guys have missing teeth, and like you see pictures of them, they look like they've literally been through wars by the end of it. And then the Stanley Cup is treated like a holy object of reverence. Like you see when they'll take the cup through the country to visit all the towns of the players where the players come from, and people will come to touch the Stanley Cup as it comes through their town.
As that politician said once, now that's just sad. if it weren't so ludicrous, it would be simply funny. But it really is sad. But this is what one thinks of the words of Aaron to the children of Israel when they made the molten calf gold. Behold your gods, O Israel. And that's always the case. These are the false gods that the enemy of our race, the devil, comes up with, whereby he lures men into his service. And these are the replacements for religion. It's not the worship of God anymore, the honor to Our Lady and the saints, the service of Christ the King. These are your gods. A Catholic, and especially a Catholic parent, but any Catholic, has to take a firm, reasoned stand against this excess, which is a false religion. And I guess I'm going to have to use the S word here. I do think it's sinful. It's sinful in many, many respects. Sinful because of what it leads to, and sinful in and of itself, what it distracts from, and it's sinful in the scandal that it gives. So what we're proposing is truly a little bit of a backpedal. And okay, we need to stop all this stuff and walk away from it, rethink these things, and get back to a true and a Christian perspective on sports as game, as recreation.
And I suppose another aspect to sport, we've talked about it as fun recreation, but it seems to me, I know in Iota Unum by Romano Amerio, he has a chapter about how the Novus Ordo sect has changed the approach to sport. And he talks also about the traditional Catholic teaching that sport falling under the heading of the care of the body and exercise, fitness, and as part of medical considerations about hygiene, so a way of maintaining your health. So from that perspective, it seems to me that there is, or there can be, a valid place for sport and exercise, especially in a day and age where many more of us than in any time period before don't do physical labor for our day-to-day job. Like for myself, I sit at a desk or stand at a podium all day, every day. So for me, getting out and playing a little bit of casual hockey with some friends, or that's very helpful to me to stay healthy.
As long as you don't lose any teeth, Nicholas. We'll draw the line there.
Well, I wear a visor now.
Or help anyone else lose any teeth. Right. No. See, that's gets back to this point about the question of balance and prudence, and doing something which is, really for a good motive. You can have certainly an element of that in a team sport that is fun and that stays at that level, but it's when the as it were, the attitude changes. I mean, there's and it's the team sports, I think, that you have to be more careful with because of the idea of the influence. You're on a side, one side against another with a crowd. I mean, you're not going to get a great deal of, let's say, anger if you're playing golf or if you're playing tennis. Although, there were certainly many badly behaved professional tennis players, but
golf players too. Maybe not on the course, but
you can get mad, I suppose, at anything. But generally, those games are considered a little bit more of a gentleman's game, and there's a little bit less conflict. But there's that question of balance, and that, as you say, exercise is something important as well. But
it is a good caveat. I mean, it's a warning that the atmosphere can change very quickly due to human weakness, and also the world in which we live, which gives us this message overtly and covertly that competition and winning is everything. It's almost just a default setting on our psyche anymore. So it's very easy, especially for children and for adolescents and the immature, to get into that world almost right away. You lose the sense of balance or tongue-in-cheek or play or fun, and all of a sudden it becomes deadly serious. And we have to watch that.
Yes.
So it seems to me the takeaway from all this is that Catholics should be very aware of these things, and when they're approaching these things, be cautious and aware of the risks, and work at bringing a proper attitude to it and promoting a proper attitude among others. Would that be a good way of trying to incorporate a bit of sports? And I know board games were brought up in the last episode as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's certainly true. I think that all of our Catholics, though, have an obligation to inform themselves about these points, about the Olympics, about the excess of organized sports, about the concept of agonia, and its dangers, and what sport really should be, and to opt out of the system, whether it be going to the Super Bowl party or whether it be, smashing somebody's teeth out in the hockey rink, and also with the children and their participation in organized sports, which are going to play on a Sunday, which will expose children to a whole lot of bad example and bad influence. Catholics have an obligation to form a right conscience about these things, as we used to say in our Legion of Decency pledge in this country about films. Form a right conscience, inform yourself, and then put your faith into practice. Don't go along with the pervading atmosphere of the age, which is really a pagan revival that surrounds kind of religion replacement on many sides. It's grabbing for your soul, your time, and it's grabbing for your children, and don't let them do that. But if you're conscious and you're careful about the way you go about these things, I think you'll do just fine.
Yes, that's exactly it. And as with everything else, the unreflected life is not worth living. Mm-hmm. And Catholics have to be reflecting constantly on the values of their culture. They have to reflect on the different things they're doing and educate themselves and examine their consciences. And this will raise your awareness of what your duty and what your attitude should be as a Catholic. And, God willing, it will keep you out of any sort of immoderation, any bad attitudes when it comes to things like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings us to the end of our show. So thank you, Your Lordship and Father, for joining me on the show and for all your insights. And we at the Restoration Radio Network would ask that if you found this show to be of value to you in your Catholic faith, that you please consider making whatever donation is possible to our apostolate, no matter how small it may be. And to those of you who have donated, a heartfelt thank you for your kindness and generosity. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to leave us a message on our Twitter handle, which is @TrueRestoration, or by email. You can mail us at conversations@truerestoration.org. And we want to remind you that Clerical Conversations on the Crisis is a production of the Restoration Radio Network. All rights are reserved, and any duplication without explicit written permission is forbidden. However, permission can usually very easily be obtained by writing to us at mail@truerestoration.org. So thank you once again, my Lord and Father. And
you're very welcome.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you to our listeners. Until next time, keep the faith.